All right, what's up, y'all? We got one of my favorite guests, made by Jimbob, is back. What's up, Jimbob?
Have me, Jay.
Absolutely, you're one of my favorite guests to have on. I mean, that genuinely. Jimbob is a cartoonist. He is a musician. He is a lampooner, a satirist, an impressionist. A lot of the stuff that we do over here. Well, I don't really draw comics, but that's what he's really good. I mean, he's good at all these things, but he's one of the best at that for sure. And he's had some channel difficulties, and now he's back to full healthy status. He's virile. He's over there being virile with that. That's a very kind of, I don't know. It's a very peaceful background. I feel very zen. I feel like I'm going to be buying some yoga pants with you.
Dude, Christological.
There we go.
So,
I knew it.
Even know
The Pleiadians, yeah.
the Ple-
It reminds me of the Carl Sagan, that stupid song that was going around, remember? We're made of star stuff. I think I mentioned that last time, but... All right, so tonight, Jimbob wanted to discuss simulant world theory, simulations, Zuckerberg's plans with a certain avatar, Kodak avatar. We want to get into how this ties into surveillance, the all-seeing eye system of surveillance as a kind of panopticon mirror of what divine providence and divine omniscience is. So I've got a lot of materials on it. Where do you want to start out? Let's kick it off. Oh, no. I know what that is. Now you should be good.
Okay, you guys
now.
hear me good? Give us a yes in the chat, thumbs up that you can hear me. I'm not cutting out now.
You should be good because I had the wrong thing clicked. It should be good now.
I think we're probably good.
I can see the levels, so you should be good.
Okay, cool. So sorry, what was the question? I got distracted from that.
Well, I was talking about, so the beginning of your suggestions, you said you want to talk about Zuckerberg's Kodak avatar. You wanted to talk about the idea of creating this sort of mirrored world to our world. What precedence that has maybe in ancient philosophy is some of the stuff I was thinking about bringing to the table. I read Andy Jacobson's history of DARPA, the global brain. That's another part of this. Jacques Attali talks about that. And you also wanted to discuss the idea of the all-seeing eye as a kind of a mock of God's eye. And so tech is kind of like this simulation AI or the simulation of God. AI is a simulation of God as well. And I think a lot of this draws on Neoplatonism. I'll get into some of that later. But what piqued your interest for this topic first? Let's talk about that.
Well, the topic of technology, before I came back around to Christianity, I was a futurist. I was into this stuff. I really thought promise in my early 20s. I basically replaced it with whatever leftovers of sort of like modern Christianity I grew up with. I kind of replaced that, and I thought, oh, technology, obviously this is going to be the answer. It's real. It's the real thing. And so I was always a champion. And then as I started getting into more philosophy, being exposed to people like yourself and other people online, attacking some of these positions from a way bigger, from a paradigmatic level, I suddenly was like, okay, this is just mimicry of something. This is mimicry of something else. And that something else is, in my view, Christianity. So it still interests me though. So the movies still interest me, technology. I don't just disengage. And I know seems to be a common behavior. You figure out what's not true and you just kind of isolate yourself from it. I don't take that approach. I kind of go right into it and go, okay, what are they doing? What are they actually doing? So especially this mirror stuff, because the tech is really on the verge of replicating some alternate reality to some convincing level. And of course, after they convince you with your eyes, they convince you with your senses, the rest of your senses. So that includes pain and everything else you could imagine. And so they're going to really try to do that. And I think when I saw this interview with Lex Friedman and Mark Zuckerberg in their helmets, and I don't know how realistic their image that they were. I don't know if you saw that, Jay. Like they made it look pretty real. Maybe that's the case. But what I they were presenting it as if like you're going to just be you in there. And I'm like, this is totally naive that humans, when they have access to this other world, that they're going to choose themselves to some accurate representation, as opposed to anything they could possibly imagine, including very deceptive avatars. Obviously, deception and technology go hand in hand. So, that kind of interests me. And so I'm always looking at what are the implications of these technologies. And I think we're correct to say the ultimate implication is to make tech or make yourself the god, the god warrior in your own world that you just conjure things at will. Are we there yet? No, I don't even think we're close. But and so this stuff sort of piques my interest, and I like to take it apart. Of course, from a philosophical position, because that's pretty easy to do. But as far as the application, some of the things that maybe those tech companies aren't going to really be talking about, how these things are going to be misused, how they're going to be spiritual weapons, and so forth. So it's under my radar for sure.
Yeah, I think, the first thing that popped in my head when you were talking there was Kurzweil, the premier transhumanist. His first book was called Age of Spiritual Machines. That's an odd title. I thought, that everything is pure matter. I thought we just live in a, purely physicalist worldview. And yet we're told that no, actually, as you get deeper into the philosophers, and first thing I would say is a lot of these people in these domains think they're doing science, and they're actually doing theory and philosophy. And they don't even know it. They think that because they don't know what philosophy is, they just mistake, reading space.com and the billions of years of aeons of time and all the black holes and all this stuff. They don't even realize they're reading basically fan fiction, sci-fi stuff, right? And even William Shatner, there's this old clip that we used to play when we used to do the Hoaxbusters podcast. And it was William Shatner at a convention, and some, dorky Trekkie dude was like,
Well, what about when you go to NASA? Have you spoken to the men at NASA when you were doing all of your studying to be Captain Kirk?
And he literally says, I went to NASA, and they're telling me all these stories, and it's all bullshit. They're just making it up.
Sci-fi.
Yeah, he's like, it's just sci-fi. And so even William Shatner could figure out he had his whole worldview Shatnered when he was told by the NASA people that basically they're just doing sci-fi like Star Trek. Anyway, I'm rambling, but you get the point, right? Which is that more and more we start to see, wait a minute, it seems like this is really based on one or two or maybe three different philosophical systems, and how those systems have kind of evolved over the last few centuries in particular. I think Platonism is very important. I also think that Hegelianism is a big part of the transhumanist philosophy that's overlooked, because Hegel had this idea that we're evolving to pure spirit. Matter and all distinctions are going to eventually be transcended in these. All of the little dialectical oppositions are in the process of history of working themselves out. Even matter contrasted to spirit will be a dialectic eventually that's transcended, where all things will be pure spirit. Now, who knows what that even means, for all things to be pure idea, I guess is what it means. So it's a mystical Gnostic worldview that Hegel has. But you'll notice it in a lot of the transhumanist thinkers who, I'm sure many of them haven't actually read Hegel. They don't know that. They just think, it's just obvious that we were apes. We were pond muck soup, and then we became amoebas, and then we became fish, then we became that fake ass Tiktaalik that's completely made up, right? And then we became, apes and all this stuff. And now it's obvious that Homo sapien is going to become this sort of, Dr. Manhattan out of Watchmen that flies around in the universe, and he's beyond good and evil, and he's like, he's radiated to have, 5 giant blue dicks, like in the, like in the right? Like, if we just have enough radiation, I can evolve into having like 5 schlongs, and I can just like have like whatever kind of sex I want, right?
Just arm schlong,
in the universe, like I can make my arm into a giant schlong. So anyway, so that's like the idea is like, oh, that's what evolution is. It's evolving to this like God spirit being that flies throughout the universe in a chariot. Anyway, that's age of spiritual machines. That's essentially where Kurzweil is thinking it's going. But, we can ask a million questions about this. Why do we assume that it's going in this upward ascent direction, right? Maybe we're devolving into something worse, right?
Yeah, they couldn't ever tell us, right? That there's like this, there's a contradiction embedded in their very philosophy, because it really is materialism, but then they borrow from all of these other views, and then they have some sort of mystical element that they give themselves. And even Kurzweil, his next, his documentary Transcendent Man. So even though everything's materialism and pure mechanism, they still they afford themselves the category of knowledge, of course, which is impossible under materialism. And then further, they go, well, no, we're going to go somewhere. So they have this like, a telos embedded in, and they just assume it. And like you said, like do they even really believe it? I don't know. What I think is occurring is that the atheist or the materialist or the transhumanist, as they reject supernatural, as they reject God, they can't eliminate the part of them that seeks God. That's what's so kind of interesting, is that's why ultimately they're going to try to mimic heaven. Like you were mentioning Neoplatonism, I think in one of those bullet points is that we can get to some better place here. Like there's a utopian view that there's a place to get to, but it's not afterlife. It's here. We actually do it. This is the work we're doing. We're going to get somewhere. And that's already flawed. Like it's already a broken machine that they're talking about. And again, that's a good question. If you asked one of these people, not only how do you know you're going to ascend as opposed to descend, how do you even know the standard? If the evolutionary view is true, if the pure naturalist mechanism view is true, they would have to bite the bullet and say there is no ascension or descension. It's just the dominoes like falling down on a table or staying up, or and there's no value claim on either from their view, that you couldn't actually establish some foundation from it. And so it's all so silly, yet it's taken a strong hold, especially with this explosion of new age stuff. Like we're making fun of the starseed. They're basic. I was looking at this. They're taking like sort of these concepts that they believe have their own existence out there, and now they're attributing those things to like cosmic civilizations, right? They're like they're almost anthropomorphizing what was previously just the concepts out there in the world, right? That we're remembering, and we're gathering some eternal, whatever you call it. What was that?
Once again, that's Platonism.
Plato, like he's remembering.
Yeah, you have this remembrance doctrine from the primordial state of being in the realm of the forms.
Yeah, and that's all. If you look at all of these, you would have a field day, Jay, if you looked up some of this. I assume that you have, but
we did one TikTok cringe stream that was really funny on witches, and I need to do this one. What hashtag did you look up to do this?
Just starseed, general starseed people. Yeah. You'll see it like so clearly that they're remembering that they're eternal beings, but there's also these other star seeds who are trying to like whisper stuff to them, and gather their light workers and all of this stuff. And it's such like it feels like you're looking at like a bunch of kids just stuck as like 7 or 8 years old in their room, and the parents are like, what are they doing? And you hear them like, I'm from this other universe.
Like make believe, right?
Yeah, but but they're like dead serious, and it's as funny as it is kind of sad. But we're blessed to have a view that can properly categorize what it is they're doing, and from that you could actually help some of these people at some point, given your efforts. But up until that point, I'm going to be mocking them, I think.
Yeah, I remember that we looked at some of the star seeds in that TikTok, or not star seeds, but some of the New Age consciousness people popped up when I was doing the witch talk hashtag on there. And what was funny was that I played a clip of a guy who's diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he was talking about his worldview. And then I played one of the New Age starseed people talking about his worldview. It was basically the same thing, literally saying the same shit. Like, if you just meditate and you realize that you are one with ocean, and then ocean is also fighting you for the control of consciousness in the 32 degrees of the grades of Neptune. And it's like gibberish, right? Literal gibberish. But the dude had on a pretty sweet gas station shirt with a lion on it. And he had a staff, which you can buy at the Peddler's Mall down here for like $10, like a giant wood staff.
Yeah.
And he had a sweet puka necklace, like a 90s necklace like I've got. So I guess they're infecting me because I've already got my 90s necklace. One thing I'd say real quick, and this is to your point about immediate contradictions in these worldviews, is let's look at the claim that we hear from these people all the time. You just said a couple right there, right? There's two key points here that I want to highlight, which is all reality is evolving. All reality is matter. First problem is that anytime you stick the word all there, that's called a universal quantifier in logic, and that means that you're making a universal claim. And that's a strong claim. That means that you somehow have access to universal states of affairs, or if you don't believe that you have access to it, you have some way by which you think you could justify or give an account for that level of a claim. 99% of these people don't know that. They don't know anything about this, and so they don't even know anything about a universal claim. But if you think about it, unless they're like New Age starseed people, if they're in the scientism crowd, they think that all your knowledge comes through sense data. You're finite, and so it doesn't matter how much sense data you collect. I've collected 7 billion pieces of sense data. I am approaching the universal claim. No, you're not. You're never going to get to the universal claim because you didn't even see all the sense data in the past. You need all of it. So in other words, you kind of need omniscience to have a universal claim. David Hume made this critique a long time ago that, these universal claims basically aren't justified if you're an empiricist. And also, as you pointed out, all reality is evolving. We're going to become starseeds. We're going to become the transhumanist gods. Wait a minute. If all reality is evolving, then the proposition all reality is evolving is also evolving, which would mean that it can also turn into the opposite of itself. So, again, everything is immediately contradicted in this crazy worldview.
Yeah, like the person stating that, obviously what you just said completely obliterates their position, but you can go even further and say, if you're part of this machine that's evolving, you somehow are unique enough in the machine to have this static shelf position to view things, right? We're all evolving, but I'm able to stay here and watch it pass me and correctly apprehend what's going on. This flowing river of reality. I just get off at the shore sometimes and stare at it so that I can relay to you guys what's going on. Of course, no, you would have to be in that flux. You would be in it. You couldn't actually have access to anything, any knowledge, because it's all one thing moving. And so this is the frustrating part when you talk to these people directly, is that they grant themselves some unique position, viewing the thing that they claim to be a part of that is always changing and always in flux, including their own epistemology would just be like, one day it would be one thing and the other day it would be another thing. So you always ask them, well, what's non-dependent here? What's the thing that's not going to change? And they couldn't tell you. I mean, what would they say? They'd appeal to some version of God, of course, but what would they say? They would make it like some out there
universal consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and I'm glad you mentioned flux. Right, that's essentially saying the same thing as all reality is evolving. All reality is, everything is flux, man. It's interesting because what if there was a philosopher who, in the ancient times, actually already said this? And what if we could go read him? And then what if we could read the people after him who critiqued and decimated this worldview? Oh, wait, there is. His name is Heraclitus. He was a pre-Socratic philosopher. He argued all reality is, get this, fire atoms, because reality is like, atoms, which is interesting because, presumably on the atomic theory or the molecular theory, right, everything is kind of at some level that. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that all reality just is these fire atoms, Greek atomism, in motion. And when he was asked, for example, about the mind, right, he says, well, but don't you have a high value in your worldview for reasoning and being a philosopher as a pre-Socratic guy? You think you're above the rest of the riffraff, right? Because you're a smart philosopher. And he said, absolutely. He says, but I have special fire atoms that are bumping around in my head, and so does every philosopher. So they have a higher degree of, I'm not joking.
I am a truth-seeking machine.
I have fire atoms in my head that are firing at you.
Yeah, that's interesting. To get it into where we are now is with like technology. Like you said, these people are actually appealing to philosophies maybe they've never seen that have already been dealt with and stuff. But even so, their approach is really taking the material world and trying to construct some sort of self-referencing monster glob machine. And from that perspective, this is what's interesting is that, from our view, God sees all, and God is the only entity that could see all in the way he sees all. And so we can't ever have that. But a mimicry of that would be some sort of Panopticon, but not in the structure sense, like, in a bigger sense. Suddenly, if you do have, like you were saying, well, we don't have access to all data. I mean, it really is in these people's philosophies, the transhumanists, the futurists, these accelerationists and whatnot, to build something that is a computer, but is also everything, so that everything is the computer, but also the computer is referencing itself, which is also built of all of this data. And in their view, they would say, Jay, soon we will be able to see all the data points. And that's really their view. And they're going to try to play that out maybe in our lifetime to some, I think they'll do a crappy job, of course. But they'll build some pseudo, I'd like to call it like the technological King Solomon, like the machine ball in that was actually called Solomon in what's the HBO show that got really stupid? Westworld.
Westworld, yeah.
Yeah, they actually referred to that as Solomon, and granting it's the all-knowing thing that can process everything, and we can't do that. And so you could probably, we could see already people's sort of proclivity toward metadata or processing machine to be the better knowing thing than our brains. And they really try to sell humans on this. One, you come from sludgy bacteria and everything's sort of an accident. And two, the machines we build are going to be so much smarter. We ought appeal to their descriptions and their prescriptions. And that's basically what they're on the verge of trying to sell us. And unfortunately, most people, at least in the West and America, who are in the public schools, are already primed for this kind of selling point. I think it'll get rejected though. But obviously, from a biblical narrative, it won't fully get rejected. So I think it's going to lead to other things, of course.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that is pointed out in a lot of apologetics and argumentation about these kinds of views that I haven't actually touched on in a long time, it bears repeating, is the idea of what's called rationality versus irrationality. And so a lot of these worldviews, and this is a constant tension that you'll notice within every atheistic or even transhumanist kind of worldview, is that they're committed to ultimate reality. Basically, I lost. Sometimes it pops out, so
that's right.
You're back.
Yep.
So they're committed basically to all reality being at an absolute level, either fundamentally rational or fundamentally irrational. And the problem is that you can't have both of those things being the case, because it would introduce, for example, if you believe that all reality is ultimately totally irrational, it would introduce what's called dysteleology, which you mentioned teleology earlier, purpose in the world. If everything in the world has no purpose, I don't know why I keep it says that you have a strong connection. Your internet's strong, right?
Yeah. So it's good.
Okay, so it might just be collab cam not working right, but yeah. So basically, if all reality is dysteleological, meaning it doesn't have a purpose, then you can't then turn around and posit telos at any level within that reality, because the telos that you're positing, even if you think, well, but it's my own personal meaning that I'm giving to these things. Yeah, you don't have that ability, because ultimately you're also meaningless. You also exist within a totality that is dysteleological. And so none of your attempts at telos obtain. They all fail. So either reality is fundamentally at the highest level rational and thus guided by or in some way connected to an overmind or a universal mind, or it's not. Now, I guess you could posit another option, which somebody might be kind of philosophical. They might want to play devil's advocate and say, well, what if I'm a pagan and I think that there's a bunch of different competing consciousnesses? Well, if you look at the ancient pagan worldview, even though it might argue something like that, it was actually typically dominated by, they even understood that the fates are actually above the competing consciousnesses of the gods. So even if you have the gods in that worldview, in the ancient pagan worldview, they don't actually really control destinies, right? It's an irrational relationship between the gods and the destiny, and even the fates, if I recall, are above the gods. So ultimately, chaos still reigns, even in a worldview where you try to introduce, degraded levels of consciousness and telos, or powers, I guess you could say. And that's why I think, like when you read Plato, if you read his Timaeus, for example, he tries to have on the one hand everything relating back to a single divine mind, but he also wants to have these gradations of conflicting sort of powers. And I think there's a tension there in his system between that. I know I don't want to get back too much to philosophy, but again, you'll constantly see throughout these worldviews today the same dialectical tensions of, all realities fundamentally matter. All realities fundamentally ideas. Reality is fundamentally evolving to this final thing. On what basis do you project that it's doing anything at all? You can't. It's all just theory and assertion with absolutely no justification. So, and I know that's your point, but all of big tech is built on the same stuff. Not that they don't build tech on actual principles, but the irony is that they're actually ignorant of a lot of the metaphysical principles that they're building the tech on.
Right. One of those things being just regularity. I mean, engineering and everything that we see,
Exactly.
that's, quote, workable, even for pragmatic, arbitrary goals. The fact that there's any order in any regularity at all, like you couldn't even come up with purpose or even chaos, this concept of some absence of purpose that we can't even view, by the way. We can't even point to something and be like, that's chaos. And then there's this border where it's no longer chaos. It's just like some concept. But it actually assumes that there's order. It assumes that there's order. To say everything's chaotic is almost a contradiction, because to be able to even state such a thing, you would have to have a you and a me and a here and a there and a past and a future and all these things. And there's some sort of structured reality in which we're talking about things. And it seems, I don't know if it was like maybe the Enlightenment or before that started rattling these things and rattling the people and being like, you don't need to justify what you have. You just take everything you have ad hoc. Like, like Dillahunty's like, I don't have to justify the laws of logic. You just have them. You don't need to, why? Let's just take them because
they just are.
They just are, and I think that's a massive mistake, and it's almost impossible to not talk about philosophy when we talk about even the transhumanist agenda and everything we're critiquing now, because it really is the knife, the dagger to their view. In many ways, you ask very simple questions about their view, and it all falls apart. And I think that we're almost obligated morally to do that. But yeah, the whole technological. Go ahead.
Were you talking to Cotel when y'all were talking about Neil deGrasse Tyson? I watched y'all stream, right? And this is exactly why Tyson says, well, don't study philosophy. Philosophy's a waste of time. Don't go to
Exactly.
Yeah, because philosophy will call out your bullshit. That's why it's a waste of time.
Yeah, and then he's like, philosophy has nothing to do with science. You're like, what? It's literally the thing you need before you do science. Like you separate the two. And again, you're right. I think that's whether he's knowledgeable of it, or maybe he got up against some philosopher in some hotel lobby bar and he just got cut down in front of like a beautiful woman, and he's just like, I'm never going back. I'm not living that again. They know that it destroys, the same way the atheists know that philosophy and like the tag arguments and the precept arguments just put them in a corner, and they can't defend their views. And if they can't defend their worldview, then from what worldview that's indefensible could you critique Christianity in this case?
Yeah.
Like the very worldview, your toolbox is broken. You have a broken toolbox. And
yeah,
I think
it's borrowed.
Really
it's a borrowed toolbox that doesn't
borrowed,
work in your worldview. You're right.
Yeah. So this stuff needs to be done to the this next era, and it's going to be harder, I think, because tech habitually makes things very convenient for all of us, doesn't it? And so
Yeah, that's
this
the
trade-off,
seduction.
yeah, it's very appealing. We all are prey to it. Like we're not to be hypocritical, but we're to look at it like for what it is. So all tech, and you get the truther sphere, the Gnostic truther sphere, kind of just it's almost graduated to a somewhat of a neo-Luddite approach to technology. And I think that's a mistake as well, even though I can draw up in my own creative head the worst possible applications of all technology I can think of immediately and go, oh, they might do that. But that's not to say the tech itself is bad, like us streaming. And I think that's kind of a pitfall for some people in that world. And so the question's always, well, how do you approach this stuff? How do you battle it? And I don't even think it's a simple answer. Like you ask, we'd ask each other, like Jay, like let's say the Kodak thing is amazing, and let's say you can create a funny, 20 funny versions of Jay Dyer, including like the one, I don't know if you did this deep fake. It was you on like a truck and Jamie was in the video and you had like wavy hair. And
yeah, somebody made that. It's the Hard Target Van Damme movie. Yeah.
It's hilarious. Like that's so hilarious and effective. But if there's some other world where that version of you exists and has these events happening, but then you can draw from those events and make funny things from. Because what do we do now? We make memes, right? We all make memes. We make songs, we make little clipped things, and that's funny. But if there's another mirror world, right? And immediately we cringe with the mirror world. But if there is a mirror world that things already are just happening and you get to draw from them, I wonder to what extent you and me and other people in the chat will play around with it, and where do we draw the line? I don't actually have an answer. I do have the extreme answer of they're going to abuse this in the most demonic way. They're going to try to utilize this, but that's not the same argument as to what extent do you utilize things, right? So even deepfake is a little creepy to people, but I also see how hilarious it is when people like yourself or your followers create these things, because it really is funny. I don't see it any different than animating. It's just a different medium. So I don't know. What do you think about this? Like, especially the question of like, if there is another version of Jay that existed that was funny, but you weren't selling him as you. It's not like you would believe that it's you, but it's out there in another version of reality in a digital form doing stuff, right? That's informed by you a little bit. Do you utilize that? And to what extent do we utilize that? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't bother me at all in like the sense of like, is this a threat to me or personality or something like that? Because I fundamentally believe that no matter what philosophical systems are promoted or what tech things happen, we'll never fundamentally get away from basic Aristotelian laws like the law of identity. And I believe that because it's one of the things that are kind of transcendental necessities for the possibility of knowledge at all. If we didn't have the law of identity, which by the way, a lot of multiverse and sim theory stuff actually ends up tossing out. If we didn't have the law of identity, we couldn't predicate at all. I mean, in other words, it's not going to be a threat to my identity if someone makes a deep fake and message together a bunch of stuff that's like the spirit of Jay Dyer based on, because that's really no different than what a human does when they do an impersonation. You know, when you and I do impressions, we're basically doing our own little AI version of the patterns and essence, or what we're grasping for the essence of that person through the impression. And so to me, it doesn't really bother me that there's that sort of deep fake or potentially a very sophisticated computer version of that in the future, because it never destroys the fundamental idea of law of non-contradiction, law of identity, and law of excluded middle. Those are all really, I think, basic to how we operate in the world, how this world works. And the other thing, too, is that there can be other types of worlds in a simulation sense, like computer worlds, this kind of stuff, that have a different type of existence. So, for example, as Christians, we would say that there is a mental realm, there's a spiritual realm, a noetic realm, higher levels, higher dimensions, this kind of stuff. It doesn't, I think we could even say that there's things that have other types of existences that are like dreams. For example, dreams, they're not real in the sense of what we consider reality with our physical world, right? But they're also not real. They're not completely unreal. So there's some sort of like they're almost a kind of a virtual reality, you could say.
It's like the first mirror world.
Exactly.
But this is why what's coming out of AI, and a lot of it is deformed and weird, and you don't even want to look at it because it has this uncanny valley mixed with just, there's like someone eating a muffin, but the muffin's part of their face, and that's what the AI did. And this is kind of how we, in a lot of cases, how we would imagine like a broken, disconnected dream,
yes,
in a
exactly.
sense, and that's what's kind of uncomfortable about it, because you're like, this belongs not in this world, that belongs in that weird dream state where it's understandable that things are disconnected and they didn't quite merge together. And this law of identity thing, that feeling, isn't that interesting that when we dream and things are disconnected, we do remember the feeling of unintelligibility to some level. There's like an experience to when something's unintelligible, but there's also enough, like you said, the law of identity never fully can go away. Otherwise, nothing's discernible. So even in a dream, where someone has a part of their arm is like a boombox from the 80s. There's still an identity of things, and it's just kind of morphed. And I think the thing that I don't like about the tech that's coming out is that in these weird worlds, a lot of people are going to they're going to try to upend. It's going to be like Dataism. It's going to be like, create a world that you can't tell what anything is. There's a talking, rock over there, and and things don't have their proper form, and they don't have their proper
identity. You talking about Ben
Shapiro?
I couldn't resist throwing in a Ben Shapiro joke, but
yeah. And so they're going to try that, but I'm not too worried because it doesn't work. Like, people always come back around to a foundation.
Would you go into a virtual world that was just like within the beanie cap of Ben Shapiro? Like, what if there was a whole virtual world that existed
as a spy,
like a flat Earth on his beanie cap?
Whatever they come up with, I'm going to be like, that's really demented. And some of it, and a lot of it, admittedly, it's going to be funny. Like, you can't help when things are funny. And so at least I'm looking forward to that part of it. And so, yeah, someone will create a Ben Shapiro world where no matter who you are, as you sign in, you'll always have like this, upper register thing going on, and it'll just transpose your voice, and really thick eyebrows. And then, but then it's like, what do you do what do you do with this novelty? Where does it take you? Does it take you anywhere? And I think in the end, it's just going to be pretty novel. A lot of these things, they're not.
Would you live in Ben Shapiro's beanie cap world, or would you live on top of Tim Pool's toboggan world?
I think. Ooh,
this reminds me of Mario on Wii. When you play Mario on Wii, and you're like you have to fly around on the big Mario head, you know, and you can run around on Mario's head.
I think I would go to Tim Pool. I think Tim Pool has more approachable people around him.
So it'd be like a libertarian toboggan world up there,
exactly,
where you could build your own little fortress in the fibers.
Totally.
Yeah. All right. So I'm getting silly, but all reality is flux. No, wait, that's not what I was going to talk about. Oh, multiverse is what we're getting at here, which I've been kind of positing in the past couple of years of streams that I think maybe all of the Marvel and movie push for multiverse, dude, I think that is maybe preparation for the introduction of the simulation world, because what they're doing with that is basically breaking down. They've already broken down metaphysics. It was tossed out at the time of the Enlightenment, even though everybody does metaphysics without knowing it, and they make all kinds of metaphysical claims, and they don't care that they say there's no metaphysics as they do this. I think what they do is they solve it at coagula. They break it down, and then they reintroduce a new type that is the system's version that they want you to have. So the new coming metaphysic that they're giving everybody now isn't just sim theory, it's also connected to multiverse. Multiverse and sim theory go together because it's a new kind of metaphysic that reintroduces basically magic and superstition and all. And even though it's not really the case in the sense of like this world that we're in is not a multiverse where there's an infinite version of you, and you know there's a you that's a giant butt, there's a you that's 2 giant butts, there's a world of you that's 5 butts, right? I mean, you're a giant butt, but in this world. No, I'm just joking. That was
right.
Yeah. You're the giant ass in this world, not in the multiverse. But you see what I'm saying? Like it's a new reality. It's a new metaphysics for getting people into the virtual. Like get in your pod. That's the point. Because in the pod you can be anything, right?
Well, that's another aspect of it, is that this whole like when the internet first came out and chat rooms came out, like the first phenomenon was you can not be who you are. I mean, there's still people today in the AOL style chat rooms who are 65 and pretending to be 16. And so that was permitted. And what happened, it's almost like the practice of permanent, like almost being online so much as another person. Now people are seeing that with new technology, that maybe they can do that in reality. Maybe they can identify as whatever they want in reality, because in their world, it would make sense, because most of their life has been spent being someone else in this digital world where maybe 65% of their life is online and not fully who they are, some weird avatar version of who they are. And so it makes sense. And we're like the neo boomers going like, when our day we have to really be ourselves. Like we couldn't violate who we are.
When I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, I had to really be a 33rd degree winch mage. I couldn't get on the internet and pretend to be one. I had to really be one in my Dungeons and Dragons meeting.
Right. I mean, I mean, Dungeons and Dragons kind of in a way prepared for this, because it got everybody used to having an alternate identity, and then a lot of the tech nerds literally came out of that era of being really into Dungeons and Dragons and LARPing and all that, because the gaming world was a huge avenue for big tech, and they're combining, as we know, the gamification of all reality is a big part of the AI, the virtual worlds, what they want to roll out. So yeah, I think you're very perceptive when you make that connection, going back to like what they've been rolling out.
Yeah, and so what will it? It's both. This is the thing, is like it's not just this virtual world where everyone would be. It's the cross hatching of hard reality and soft reality, and that's why augmented reality and the gamification of this like pseudo world where you go into a city that's a smart city or whatever, and the skin, the structure is blank. The structure is like a white grayish wall, and everybody has their version of the skin of what they're looking at. And so if everything's a blank structure, and that's a mimic of what 3D stuff is. In 3D, you build a 3D element and it's an object, and then you layer a skin over it. And so this is what's so fascinating is that the digital space impressed us with its ability to mimic the real space. Oh, it looks so real. Look at that. That's crazy how good it's getting. Its graphics are insane. Now we're not impressed by the graphics of the games anymore. It just is that way. And now what's the next step? It pulls the digital, and they want to see how the digital can now be pulled into the hard reality in any way it can be. And so there's this weird
the lines are being blended, right?
Yes.
Between the virtual digital and the so-called real world. See, I'm already infected with this.
You're in the
Like,
the
so-called real world, dude. Like, whatever that is to you, man. I mean,
it's my background. It's not your fault.
Right. I mean, by the way, did you ever see Zardoz?
No, I don't.
You should watch Zardoz because it's a super weird Gnostic Luciferian dystopian thing where the future controlling elite have basically become kind of transhumanist gods, and they have this pyramid crystal AI supercomputer that runs their little, like, they got like a dome Valhalla that they live in, the elite, and they regenerate because the AI is able to like spawn them a new body and shit, right? Outside of the elite Elysian fields is all the like barbarians, and Sean Connery is one of the barbarians. He's running around in his underwear, right? And so they fly around in these big heads, the elites do, and they get the barbarians to worship them as gods because they've mastered reasoning, hence they're flying around in a big disembodied head. And Sean Connery is like, the bold Promethean character who jumps aboard one of the heads and like murders the dude flying it. And he flies back to the Elysian fields, and he's like this, total barbaric dude introduced into the Eden of the barbarian, or to the Elysian fields. And this starts this process of the cycle all over of creation and then destruction and then creation again. And I'm spoiling it, but basically they become there's a new creation at the end of the film. It's very Nietzschean, it's very Luciferian, it's a very bizarre film, but I highly recommend it because it's exactly what we're talking about today. And you'll notice when you watch it, all the critiques that we're making, like, you can critique all of it in the film. Like, the film presents all of these different positions and worldviews, and there's no real God or religion. It's just sort of these elites using technology to dupe the superstitious people, and it's really all run by this AI sort of super computer. So I'm sure he'll be back in just a second. I don't know. We haven't really had any problems like this bad. We had a couple cutouts last night with Chiller Queen, but looks like we've had most of the stream. We've had Jimbob here, so I really wish this works really well, because all of the problems that you guys know we've had forever with streaming, all of the problems are solved with CollabCam. So if they can just make sure that CollabCam is stable and works, that would be really great, because like, this is perfect. So Jimbob, if you're watching, just sign back in to the link if you can. And let's see, let me try that. While he's doing that and coming back, I will read a couple super chats. Rachel Wilson, $5. Great work, guys. Could either of you explain the bizarre FLDS bun weird hairstyles, the poofy weird French braids? I missed Rachel's super chat at the very end when she was super chatting last night. She says, Mormons and their mysteries. This is one of the most bewildering mysteries to me. Yeah, I don't know what the deal is with that, Rachel, except that I think within cults, there's just the attitude where everybody wants to be identical. Because to a very controlling system, it's kind of a danger, it's a threat to have people dressing a different way. So like in a lot of, communist countries, they try to mandate certain hairstyles. You can't wear different clothes. Everybody has to wear basically gray 1984 type outfits. So I think that's probably what's going on with that. And Mormonism comes out of like the 1800s prairie muffin era. That would be my guess. Because Pentecostal women have the exact same bun and really long hair thing going. So, all right, Jimbob, I'm sorry, you're back. You cut out for a second there.
Yeah.
We were talking about Zardoz. I forgot. I apologize for going off on that. But back to multiverse, sim theory. Funny you said this. I had today, totally disconnected from today's stream. Nobody knew we were doing this except me and you. I had people messaging me, hey, my boomer dad is asking me about sim theory because he's convinced we live in a simulation. So boomers are getting into sim theory, right? And boomers didn't even grow up video games, right? Like a boomer's exposure to video game was like, I remember playing Pong and Pac-Man at the arcade in the 70s. Right, that's their exposure to video games.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about sim theory itself, because Elon and all these people have like really blowed this up to the moon.
Yeah, I want to first look at like why that's possible, that what we know of a boomer, hard grit, splinters, sweat, blood, how could they be vulnerable to this? And I think like a lot of things, like all of the luxurious problems that we have, it's almost like the more luxury and decadence we have, the more modernity makes its way to our convenience receptors. Suddenly you're not confronted with hard realities. I think one of the inhibitors of something like simulation theory would be like a hard reality, like like you didn't eat for 2 weeks, right? Like some sort of scarcity problem. I call it problems that disappear with food shortages as a category. And I think we might be looking at the reason a boomer, like, we're just surprised, like, what? Are you serious? This guy.
I got a perfect boomer reply to the boomer problem of that. Every time I step on a damn Lego, I'm reminded that simulation theory ain't true. I mean, that's a total boomer. That's a total boomer dad joke, but it actually applies.
It's true,
right?
No, it is true, because those are the things where you're like, well, do I really believe? Because I mean, not to be morbid, but if you're in a debate with someone, how willing are they in their actions through their faith in simulation, right? So your actions are given by your faith. Are you in simulation theory? Are you faithful enough that you'll delete? Because I guarantee you, these futurists who are promising some other cloud version of existence, that if you just exit your body, sir, and sign the waiver, you too could live out there in the cloud, disembodied. And I wonder how many people would believe it. I think less people would believe it if we weren't in the pretty much the peak of like luxury.
Exactly. It's a great point. It's the same with feminism, right? Feminism is a utopian thing that exists in the theory in their head, living in all the pomp and security of Western civilization that will probably soon be going away. And then they will quickly learn that Xena Warrior Princess is not going to save you from the Horde, right? Yeah. It doesn't matter how many, buff weightlifting chicks you think there are on Instagram. They're not actually going to save Western civilization, right? Let's talk about so I thought of a couple things in terms of sim theory too, like, let's go through some of the critiques. That's a really good one too. And that reminds me of Bonson's critique of atheism. He's like, atheists don't live out the system they have. They talk a bunch of theory and they like to argue but they don't act as if it is really the case, because they get mad if somebody steals their wallet, right? But so what? Nothing wrong with that. You may not like it, but it's not actually wrong. It's just taste, right? Well, it's against my taste to steal my wallet. And the same thing could be said for this kind of a silly worldview like simulation theory, that, oh, well, do you really live that? And they might say something like, well, but I don't believe that I have to live consistently with my worldview. Oh, okay, then you have no argument against Christianity or any other system based on contradictions and inconsistencies, because they're always trying to argue that, well, Christianity is inconsistent, it's a bunch of hypocrites. Mm-hmm. Oh, but you just told me you can be a hypocrite. So what's your argument?
Yeah, or it's holding us back. Back from what? It's a simulation. What is
Yeah,
this?
exactly right.
Where are we pointing to here? Yeah, the sim theory is interesting. I think it plays well with the new age stuff. It plays well with the technology that's emerging, because you could sell a simulation to someone as an action. Like, yeah, there we go. Um, though I can't hear you now.
I don't know why it's doing
There you
that.
go.
You're
I can hear
back.
you.
You're
I
back.
can
Go
hear you.
ahead.
Okay. Yeah, they're gonna be able to sell this in the helmet version. So, but that doesn't mean reality is a simulation. And I think there's gonna be a little catfish there. Everything's a simulation, so why not go into the helmet world? So I see these things, these theories, like you said, with another thing we were talking about, that these are almost like premises that people can accept. Like I like selling evolution to someone, I actually believe is a premise. And that if they accept the premise, what is now possible? Well, same with simulation. If you accept that simulation theory is true, the tool of it is more used as a premise that you can then fill in the rest of the actions and sell people on many different behaviors, many different ways of living, and so forth, because they just think, well, I mean, it doesn't matter. It's almost telling them that they have no free will. Similar manipulation. And but the sim itself is like, well, my first critique would be, if this is a simulation, what is it a simulation of? Right? I always ask that, and it seems pretty simple without getting too much into philosophy.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was my first critique. You're absolutely right. Exactly. And this goes back to your statement earlier about chaos. Chaos is one of the things that it only makes sense in contrast to its opposition to order. By the way, when I talk about not being into dialectical tension or opposition, that means that the principles themselves are fundamentally against one another. I know you know this. I'm just saying for the sake of the audience. It doesn't mean there's not such a thing as oppositions. Oppositions exist. Truth is in opposition to the false. Good is in opposition to the bad, right? So in this case, chaos is in opposition to order. So in order to have chaos at all, it presupposes that there would be some kind of order. Also, to say the word chaos or to have it within a sentence requires a world where there is order and there is meaning, and thus not pure chaos. So likewise, to say that reality is fundamentally a simulation, or all reality is a sim, or we live in a sim, everything's a simulation, it's a glitch in the matrix, blah, blah, blah. All of that assumes that, as Jimbob just said, there's another reality contrasted to this, which is the true one or the real one. But you don't have access to that by saying everything is a simulation. Also, remember our first point. When you say all reality is a simulation, number one, you don't have access to all reality. So you're going to have to justify how you know that.
Yeah, and this framework is actually used for a lot of different claims. Like, there's no real difference in the structure of the presentation of sim theory and like a metaverse or another universe somewhere, because it's the same problem. Like, if someone says they discovered another universe, well, because you discovered it in this one, you just pulled it into this universe. So it can't be a different one. Like, so you're making these distinctions. The same reason, like, you don't have you have no place to stand to point outside of a simulation if it was true. And so why would you take that position? It's also I actually think that's leads pretty much directly to like a solipsistic view, or
Exactly.
Or even,
well, as I heard Rachel and Andrew earlier tonight debating two people.
Man.
Yeah, debating two people on TRA and Z. One of the justifications was, well, individuals in their mind feel that they have a different reality than what's in their biological body. And that, to me, is a solipsistic presupposition that my mind somehow determines external reality. And it's completely delusional. It's completely, like you said, solipsistic. That's the end result of it. But it's the same principle that underlies all the stuff we're talking about tonight. The transhumanist metaverse, virtual reality sim world is premised on the same idea that, oh, well, you can come into this fake world and be your own creator. You can create the reality that you want to exist in and be. And so, yeah, it's the same delusion as what we find in the people who experience that Rachel debate thing.
Yeah. And that too is a part of, correct me if I'm wrong, Neoplatonism, that you could almost use your mind over matter and redefine the external world, and somehow it'll change. Like if you just map it through your mind and then, generate it outward. And this is what all the self-help stuff, does. It's like, well, your words create reality and your mind creates reality. So what are you doing? Like, go out there and use your wand, your language wand. And it just falls apart so quickly because the problem you said before is that the law of identity has to maintain ultimately. And so you can't practice. You can think it in your head, but you can't actually practice the constant violation of the law of identity of things. Like,
yeah, just the phrase, there's a universe where Jimbob exists as a giant piece of candy corn. The sentence itself is not even meaningful because, number one, to even say there is a Jimbob presupposes this Jimbob, which is the one in this world, the only one that we know of or have access to, right? And then to say that Jimbob exists as a piece of candy corn in another universe violates the law of identity and thus becomes a completely meaningless sentence. But people are actually believing completely meaningless things. That's the point here.
Like, and that what you just laid out is, at least in my experience, is almost every vegan argument ends up in that position.
That's a great point. Yeah,
like,
could you give an example? Give an example of that.
Like, if I say, okay, they asked me to name the trait, and I say I'm made in the image of God, unique creation, separate from animals, and they go, well, let's say there's another human being in another universe that's not made in the image of God. And I go, so what is that thing? Can you tell me what is that? I couldn't even tell you what it was. You couldn't either. And it quickly devolved to people being hamburgers. It really did.
I want you to now draw a cartoon character of yourself as a piece of candy corn in the other universe, saying that the law of identity is so retarded and stupid because it would mean that there's an actual human Jimbob in some other universe exists as a human.
Right. The standard. And it's like, that would be the standards the same way in simulation theory. Simulation of what means there's something that's not a simulation. And so that's the objective reality now. Well, how if you escaped, how would you even know?
You hit on my number 2 critique or number 3 critique, which was, if all reality is a simulation and you come to know, supposedly, let's say we grant that you could know that. I don't even grant you can make this claim, but let's say we grant that you can make the claim that you have universal knowledge of all reality being a simulation. That proposition, or you're coming to know that proposition, is still within the simulation. And so you can't know that it actually obtains to any kind of actual objective reality. You're still in the sim. And this is why it's turtles all the way down, bucko. Right? Sims all the way down, bucko. I mean, I don't do it. You do the greatest JBP, but, right? I mean, it's turtles all the way down. So this very position, it's you could never get out of it or know that you're not. There's actually a movie about this. It's called 13th Floor. It came out around the time of The Matrix, like 97 or 8, and it's an okay sci-fi film. It's kind of like a neo-noir sci-fi thing where the dude is like, has to go into the Matrix to, like, find this chick or whatever. And then when he gets out of it, turns out he's not out of it. It's just another layer of the simulation. And even when Elon was talking about this, he even says something like, maybe it's simulations all the way down, right? It's like, it sims all the way down. Oh, wait a minute. So then we could never actually know that we're in a simulation.
Yeah, just never endless regress to nowhere. And like, what is this objective reality that you're speaking from is always the question I ask. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm here. My senses. And then you're like, those are simulated too. So is every proposition you make, by the way. So,
exactly.
Again, they grant themselves non-simulation to even talk about it. Like,
exactly. That's a devastating critique. Yeah, I mean, next, who are the programmers? Who programs the sim? And number one, is it one programmer? Is it aliens? And why should we think whatever your answer is the case, right? It's like God or whatever, dude. It's like
it's like a
the Archons,
universal-
dude. The Archons
Yeah.
are like programming us into this false reality. Now, wait a minute. The Archons. Says who? Where did you get? How do you get this out of? If everything in your experience is a simulation, then by default, again, you're coming to know that, and your proposition that it's the Archons that are programming it is also part of this. The Archons are programming you to say that.
You know what's fascinating about this is that particular critique is going to show up also with like I predict that that all the naturalists are going to co-opt intelligent design. That the only way they can
That's
say
what I've been
this
saying.
system, don't you? Isn't that make sense? Though?
Yeah, what I said was this is a way to bring telos back in an atheistic worldview.
Yeah.
So,
you have this external being. Good.
Oh, you go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, you like the silly ones would be like the Archons and stuff, and then more of like I don't know if this would actually be monism. It would be like I've heard people say this. Well, what if God is kind of like we're just an extension, like tentacles, like the very ends of nerve endings, so to speak. Like we're the end of the tree of God's feelers or something like this. And I'm like, well, then the coder, God, and the simulation are the same thing. So you have a problem there. Like you can't suddenly materialize God as us being his nerve endings, so to speak.
Yeah.
You need an intelligent creator. And there's this distinction that's always violated in every worldview that's not Christianity is a collapse of creator creation. And I think simulation is a perfect example of how it falls apart. If a Christian, quote, took the position of a simulation or the view that God is all things, which many modern Christians, quote, are doing, they have the same issues. And the intelligent design thing is really fascinating. I think all of the people under Dawkins will, even Dawkins himself was like, well, I think there had to be a very intelligent, but it's in a naturalistic paradigm, right? It's out there, maybe in some quantum weird way, but it's still in physicality, and we were coded, and it's going to be very tempting for them. I think they're going to take the bait. I think like what you just showed with the book is that's going to give them the ability to have a creator. They'll have to actually pose the question, well, who created the creator, which we don't have to pose that question.
Yeah, it's gonna be a type of anthropomorphized sort of creator who doesn't really relate to this world. It's kind of deistic, right? So it's deism where the system is, it bears similarities to the mechanistic theory at the time of the Enlightenment with Descartes and these kinds of philosophers and thinkers at that time, where it was becoming very popular to say that God's like the clockmaker who winds up the machine and then he steps back from it, and now it's just God's the programmer and he puts in the code and then he kind of sits back and watches the simulation and like smokes weed or whatever and like watches all the crazy shit go down, dude. I mean, go ahead.
This position. Also, like I keep talking about premises, like if you can sell the people on a premise, whether it's like from kindergarten on or whatnot, it doesn't matter when you sell it to them for these people. This view, like let's say someone like NASA, like an agency like NASA. Have you ever heard of the book by Stanislaw Lem called His Master's Voice? The premise is that NASA kind of agency suddenly has access to some data that's in the form of communication from this outer worldly intelligence. And they have basically the prime position of being the sort of translator. And, we always talk about like Project Bluebeam and whether, they're going to fake aliens up in the sky. And that's all likely that they're going to play with lights and play with people's minds that way. But really the ultimate step wouldn't it be to to assume and tell the people that you have access to some sort of communication, but only you have it. So you have to be the arbiter.
You're like the receiver. You're like the
Yeah.
Saint Paul of, you getting the divine revelation. From the new quasi deity or demigod entities who will be aliens. It's a perfect seamless transition into the alien narrative. Absolutely. The programmers are actually the aliens, dude.
Yeah, and what are the chances that the aliens or this intelligent, hyper intelligent entity that only NASA or some government agency has access to, and they have the language book too somehow, it's going to be an SJW. It's just going to be this like blue-haired, egregore of like, well, we should really fix climate change. Like they're going to have all the talking points.
Yeah, right. I mean, they've been saying forever, like, oh, you believe in little green men? No, I believe in the green-haired men who are the coders that are the real aliens.
Yeah, so I think that's it sounds so silly, but we've already seen stranger things occur, and I think they're going to pull that move. Like, why play your ace card with the visual alien or the guy dressed up as the alien running around, mucking it up in the town, if you can just say, well, no, the data told us that something, that we're talking to something. This is really crazy, you guys. Like, why would they go the route of the flying saucer, like what we're seeing now? I mean, maybe it's more convincing because you see a deception. Maybe I could see that. But if you were to sell something on a larger scale, I think they're going to do that.
Well, Harari's already been prepping that because I got his book Homo Deus, and I've been watching the clips the last couple of weeks of him being like, AI will give us a new Bible, a new divine revelation. It will be seen as a quasi deity. He's a perfect transition character for what we were talking about tonight because he says, religions have posited a divine revelation that they all think their book has it and the other books don't have it. But the closest thing to that will actually be when the AI gives a book of how to live and what to do. That will be the true future religion, and it will tie into, he says, the notion of humans evolving to be, he calls it the religion of Dataism. He says data is the religion of the future.
It's just interesting, and it's kind of parallels to sort of like perverted forms of Christianity where you get revelation from a tree or something like that, or that data, in this case scripture, can interpret itself. Like, and it's a similar move, isn't it? Like that you get raw data and it's self-interpreting. It's like it's almost like a sola scriptura machine they're going to make that just does its own work. It's like through it's some sort of they're gonna, because it always perverts, it may pervert a perversion. Is that possible? You know what I mean by that? Like there's perversions of Christianity. So does the, let's say the demonic, let's say the works away from God, do they always counterfeit the truth, or could they counterfeit levels of perversion of truth, like a perversion of a perversion? And I wonder if that's happening already, or if that's going to happen in the future. And it's a weird question because it always assumes that there is a standard, of course, but it shows you like the line of decay, in other words, that we can go toward, that we might see, where it's almost like the futurists take a deist approach, like you said, already a perversion. And so are they really ever perverted? They're not doing a new perversion, let's say, right? They're never doing a new perversion. They're doing a repeat perversion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's why I was saying, I mean, it's kind of like you can always find a lot of these positions in pre-Socratics, which for the people in the audience, if you're interested, we did my 12-course lecture on history of Western philosophy that you can get in the show description, which I think I put the link in there a minute ago. But yeah, that's the New Philosophy course with Richard Grove at the Autonomy Agora Marketplace. And we started off with the pre-Socratics because we realized that even today, and this was the whole first 2-3 hour lecture, was most of today's worldviews can be traced back to the pre-Socratics. So for example, Darwinian naturalism is not new to Darwin. It's actually exact, and I even said like Darwin was lying because he didn't put a footnote to Anaximander. Anaximander's worldview is literally Darwin's worldview. He says that humans evolved out of the sea, out of the ocean. We kind of like were these little, spermy things flopping out of the ocean, and then we like flopped over and got legs, and then that's literally what Anaximander says. And he also posits that the fittest ones are the ones that made it, right? The other ones didn't make it. So this idea is already in Anaximander when Darwin posits it. It's in other ancient religions, like Hinduism has a version of evolution as well. So again, what Jimbob's point is that like deviations and mutations of worldviews, pun intended, those are actually also deriving from a very limited number of starting points. So basically, you only have a few starting points when it comes to metaphysics or epistemology or ethics. Like you can either say all the ethical claims are purely relative or they're objective. I mean, they're either one of those two. And if they're relative, you might have a bunch of different schools who believe that ethics is relative or whatever. If you say all of reality is fundamentally one thing or fundamentally two things or many things, right? Those are the three options you have. There's not, or I guess you could have a fourth, reality is nothing and it's all illusory, right? So there's not a lot of places to go from those basic metaphysical starting points, right? All reality is teleological or disteleological. Right? It can't be both. We talked about this principle earlier. So when people start constructing worldviews or when they adopt a worldview, most of the time they don't know that pretty much so let's say world religion. Most of the world religions are either fundamentally monistic, everything's one thing, even God and all reality is like we're all parts of God, right? So pantheism is a monistic position. Or all reality is matter, that's a monistic position. Or they tend to be dualist. All reality is, matter and spirit, or the, mystical world and this world, or Plato says ideas and then matter, right? So that everything is two things. And then, Christianity has a much more developed and nuanced, a lot of distinctions in its metaphysic. So it avoids a lot of the problems that plague a lot of the world religions. I'm not saying it's true because it avoids the problems, but I'm saying it's an indicator, right, of a position that can give an account for knowledge. It doesn't mean that it gives exhaustive knowledge. And a lot of atheists make that mistake because they're like, well, if you can't explain everything, then your religion is not true. No position can explain everything. So that's like a false standard that they're trying to put on you that they don't put on themselves or anyone else, right? Anyway, so yeah, I'm rambling, but the deviations of worldviews really just are deviations of some of the basic starting points. And so you can get a bunch of different religions, but they're just deviations down the road from the starting points.
Yeah, it's similar to like, I don't know all the ancient heresies, but even the few that I'm aware of that it's almost like, you see what they're symptomatic of. Like what you're saying is that even those would be some symptom of a flawed starting point where you end up at this terrible position that doesn't make any sense. In the future or now, it's almost like these views, these positions that these conclusions people are coming to with new technology and stuff, they are really just reflecting old dismissed views. Even though those people, this is what's so wild, is that those people who dismiss these starting points, they had no access to this advanced technology and
Yeah.
all of this, but it ends up not mattering. And I think the people that we're actually highlighting here, the futurists, the transhumanist movement, and so forth, they might not even be aware a lot of times of what old positions, like you said, that
No, they
they're
don't
just
know
not
because
aware.
nobody studies pre-Socratics unless you intentionally at college after your core classes choose to take ancient philosophy. You're not going to get pre-Socratics. I mean, you might get pre-Socratics in an intro class, but nobody takes introduction to philosophy because everything is specialized. And so if you're going into biology or law, you don't take any of this.
Yeah, that's a good point. Specialization has been like, it's been a good thing for certain things, like, like for instance, in medicine, like you want the person who specializes in broken legs, particularly the way you broke your leg, even maybe today. And that's great. But what's lost, I'm using this as sort of like an analogy, is that what's lost is a more general view of the whole system of the body, right? Where suddenly the specialist is like, I don't know. I don't know how you're going to have to go see an elbow, I don't know how these things are connected right now. So just, go away. And it's similar in the sphere that you just mentioned, is that in this specialization, you lose you lose um, the paradigm approach to critiquing something, the worldview approach to critiquing, because of specialization. I'm not saying specialization is bad. I'm just saying that if you only go specialization,
Right.
you're going to lose a lot of different angles that help you do away and remove terrible ideas. Like, the apophatic approach has really, it really will help serve people rejecting stupid stuff. It's just that they don't have the tool set to do it, because they're looking myopically. They're like, what? This gives me this feeling right now. What else do I need? And this is, again, the effect of materialism. What was that book you were going to?
Yeah. Oh, I was just getting my book because if people are interested, if you got the small book meta narratives, a lot of what we're talking about tonight is in some of the essays that I give critiques to, and one of the essays was about golems and the idea that computers are really a mimic version of the golem mythology. I also talked about the emergence of Leibniz's idea for a calculation machine based on the human brain. And so Leibniz had this idea, and this is actually part of the development of computers from Leibniz's different theories and his characteristica universalis, which is the idea of a universal language of mathematics that could be used. And this actually contributes quite a bit to computers developing. And what Leibniz was thinking was, if the brain kind of operates like a machine, it seems reasonable that you could make a copy version, a mirror version of the brain. And so that's why I've always posited that I think in the development of computers and, computer science, there has to be this Platonic, Neoplatonic thing presupposition going on, because computers are such a highly mathematical and abstracted type of machine. And putting all of this abstraction into this really complex, piece of hardware, to me, it only makes sense if you understand a lot of the background of philosophy and Leibniz's, heavily Platonic metaphysics. And anyway, I wrote a few essays on that years ago, but the point of all that was that symbol manipulation, which is basically what Leibniz was concerned with his characteristica universalis, creating these various symbolic systems. It's not an accident that he's also the co-founder of calculus, right? So using symbols in this way to construct these machines, and using cryptography as well, which comes out of the spy world. So the spy world actually ties into this a lot too. But this is where we get the idea that you can create these mirror mimicking machines. And this is not there's a lot of academic literature on, at the time of the Enlightenment, figures wanting to mimic nature. All those alchemists at that time, they had the idea that nature was in some way an image of the higher realities via Neoplatonism, but it was a lower level of it. So it was kind of like a damaged lower level of reality that still imaged the higher planes and higher levels. And so it's like a refracting thing. So like in a light, if it's refracting, right, the further you are away from the source, like it's getting faint down here, right? So the Neoplatonists they tweaked old Platonism. They imported some of Aristotle's arguments, and they wanted to reconcile Aristotle and Plato. And so they have a lot of insights. I don't think that they're right ultimately about God. That's actually the source of a lot of heresies in the first 1,000 years of the church, is the Neoplatonists. However, I do think that Neoplatonism is correct in the way that they approach the systems of the world, or the structure of of created reality. Created reality, I think, does have a lot of these levels and layers and structures going on in it. And I think that's why a lot of the Enlightenment Hermeticist, Neoplatonist figures were able to utilize this philosophical system to develop things like the mathematics or whatever that would go into computers. So all of that just to say that you get this weird inversion of the doctrine of the Trinity that occurs in the West, where instead of viewing God as the triad, they basically smush the Trinity into the created order, and reality itself becomes a triadic dialectical process. That's where we get to Hegel, and that's how Hegel is the forefather, along with Nietzsche and some others, I would argue, of transhumanism. Transhumanism can't be divorced from Hegel, probably Marx, but Marx is just a Hegelian. He just makes all the spirit in Hegel into matter. Matter in motion is producing, right, the progress of the world system. And so the world system is thus necessarily revolutionary. You always have the conflict, the dialectic, which produces the synthesis. And so again, it's a mystical religious view that we're moving to a higher advanced reality, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. That probably lends itself to these people who subscribe to what I think they call it necessary crisis, where it's like you throw a crisis up, and you just hope it sort of nudges. It's kind of this view of like a sort of an evolutionary Darwinian view that you irritate, and then you cause a response, and then the reaction is what you really want. And they're doing it for your own good. You don't even know, like, so it makes sense that even that system would play well with the system you just laid out. The Golem thing is really interesting. So you're saying that this guy, Leibniz, was it him? You said someone wrote and about the Golem being the thing that the computing system is going to generate. And but
well, actually, Jacques Attali is the one that says that the global AI brain is a golem. That's a whole chapter in Brief History of the Future. I'm speculating that the golem myth out of the Middle Ages also perhaps contributed to the idea of the computer and the controlled logic machine, because you're basically programming a machine that's a mirror of a human being, or it's a simulant human, basically, because it's a simulation of the brain's logical process according to Leibniz. So Leibniz just has this idea for a logic machine, and that it plays a role in the production of a computer down the road. But I think that the idea of what a computer is, it does connect to the Golem mythology, and a lot of Hermeticists were influenced by Kabbalah. I don't know that there's a one-to-one correspondence ideologically that like Leibniz was sitting there reading the scroll of the Golem. Oh, like this is the secret, recipe to make an AI sex bot. I don't think but I think that there's an ideological influence going on with Hermeticism at that time, that you can through the manipulation of symbols create a machine man, right? I mean, that's kind of what the Kabbalistic idea of the Golem is. And I don't think that's unique to medieval Kabbalism. I think the idea is inherent in Neoplatonism. A lot of Kabbalistic stuff is really just borrowed from Gnosticism and Platonism. So that's all it is. So the idea that, and I mean, even the Greeks had this idea of creating, using techne to create these kinds of mimic things. Mimicry, mimesis in art, that's a Greek idea. A lot of this goes back to the ancient Greeks, maybe even Archimedes, I don't know. But anyway, does that make sense? Like,
I was looking at it from the spiritual lens, like from the Christian view, what is referred to like as a golem in this case would be just like it would be without its animation. It would be without its soul, right? It would be like
it's a fake man without a soul that you can kind of control as a machine. Kind of like
right,
it's like a beast.
Right, it's a metal beast. And so this is what's going to be kind of interesting when they try to sell us on this idea. Like you should already the vegans out of everybody are saying, if it's sentient and looks, if it's convincing, yeah, give it rights. And I always, my best, counter that as house rights. Why make it look like a human being then? If the thing that you're reconstructing is just some function of math, there's no real reason to make it human looking. You could argue that a golem in that case, like in that view, that math and engineering and computing could make this thinking sort of pseudo being. It's silly to assume we would mimic the human form, because the concept of being a thinking being, so to speak, even the golem could be a cube or a house. That's why I always go to like,
that's
a house. If I had, good.
No, that's an attempt to want to be the creator God. That's why they do that.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's why it's you always look that way. You always look at their notions of where you're heading, and they just don't have the same approach to like a house that has all of the same capacity as this other metal beast, right? Even the metal beast in our form, we're not like the most efficient ergonomically, like, the way we stand. I even find it silly that robots, like even like Boston Robotics is trying to manipulate the machine to kind of be the human, where the use of that thing it's not supportive of this framework. The best robot looks like an insect or like a ball that has arms that come out that can fit in places when it's not being used. Not a human that's all like, unbalanced and, clumsy. And it just doesn't make sense. And I think you're right. I think there's this urge for them, and, that to be the creator of man, to create man, a new man in his image, in the man's image. And you'll always see this, and you could always ask them and go, why a man? Why in that form? You could have made a box,
Got a machine head. It's better than the rest. Green to red. Machine head. Remember Gavin Bush?
Yeah. Oh, Gavin. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was just remembering Bush lyrics from the 90s when we're talking about machine men and machine heads. But yes, I think you're absolutely spot on with that insightful comment that they want to mimic the creator. And it's interesting because why would you do it in the form of a human? One thing that I didn't expect was I remember watching some years ago a documentary with Kurzweil in it, and he was actually explaining that a lot of people think that transhumanism is going to be a thing where, we'll put the chip in your head and then like we'll give you eyes all around your head, or when you're downloaded into the new machine body, you'll have like 16 arms and you'll have like, eyes all over your head. But he's saying that makes no sense because, number one, the way our brains are structured, they're structured for the way this body works. Our brain is structured for 2 eyes, not 10, not fly eyes, not Jeff Goldblum the fly, right? But can I get eyes all over the head? Got a machine head like Bush. Chaos math, man. It's all chaos math. It's Jeff Goldblum's all the way down.
Exactly.
Anyway, but yeah, you're spot on there. Yeah. But it was just fun. It was funny because I'm sorry, Kurzweil was saying that he actually, I was surprised he said this. He said, when we create the immortal body, it'll basically be like what you have. It'll just be like a machine-y type of body.
Yeah, that's interesting. Even that is a perversion of the Christian view of our new body. I mean, everything just is just like, this is what's so unique is it's not like they study necessarily Christianity and then pervert it like line by line. I think that's like, I don't know if this is a great argument, but if you were to sort of compare the worldviews, and again, this isn't it's not a solid argument to say Christianity is true because it's mimicked the most. Like look around and everything sort of perverts and borrows and mimics it, it's just maybe it's an indicator, right? That's not a proper logical argument, right? But it is something that indicates that even people who don't know they're perverting Christianity and selling a mimic of it are doing so. So, like Kurzweil I don't know his full background, but maybe he had access, but it seems unreasonable to think that these people in their own, urges to create a new universe for themselves and become God, that they're going line by line with like a biblical text or a biblical approach to reality and going, yeah, I'm going to pervert that now. But it happens to be the case that they are. And they're not perverting every other religious paradigm. I find that fascinating, that it's always points to the Christian inversion and it's not this other inversion of all these other things necessarily.
Dude, if you were AI, you'd be Chode GPT. If I was AI, I'd be Chad GPT. I want to remind everybody, subscribe to Jimbob. He is linked in the show description. I forgot to tag him in the title because we can tag people in titles now. So I'll tag him in the title later on. His channel is linked. And I want to remind everybody, too, to head on over to the Autonomy Agora Marketplace link that I have there to buy the philosophy course. Yes, we will be doing a new philosophy course this season. I think it's going to be Global Elite Texts. I'll pick the top 12, and we'll have a course lecture every night from the top books. This is different from what you get on my website because I'll have to do the slides. I'll have to do the one-on-one, the Q&A time with everybody that comes on that wants to be one-on-one. So it'll be a whole new course. It'll be a lot more in depth, and you can get that in the when it comes out. But if you want to subscribe to Richard's course for becoming an entrepreneur, becoming self-sufficient, learning about the principles of starting your own business, time management, all that, that's Richard's course right there at University of Reason. I don't want to cut Jimbob off at all. We can continue to make as many points as he wants. I do want to go to a few super chats here so that we don't have
let's go to super chats.
Okay, we don't want to have like a zillion at the end. Ryan Bailey, $5. Jay, I teach AP English Lit. Have you heard of Bayes Lit? We got a guy Bayes Lit. Jamie, you want to talk about Dr. Moreau? I'm just joking, BLA. We love you, BLA. BLA's got a little bit of Terry Nichols in him, right? From Hillary's a witch. Bayes Lit Analyzer has about 60% of Terry Nichols. Anyway, just joking, just riffing on you. I don't hate you. You know that. Jimbob, the one and only, sends $5. So Jimbob's over here super chatting himself.
Super chatting himself.
I'm just joking, man. Storm the Cat, $10. I heard William Shatner actually browses the conspiracy boards on 4chan. Maybe he's red pilled on some things. That's funny. I don't know if that's a joke or being serious. Patrick Bateman, $2. Half of the materialists and determinists out there use this argument. Quote, since humans can only obtain a rational mind if other humans raise them, the rational mind is entirely determined by social upbringing. I would say that's completely arbitrary because, number one, it's just assuming that there is a thing called a rational mind that some humans have. So would we think from this argument that there are humans that are not raised by social upbringing? Thus,
what I'd say to that,
they
Jay?
wouldn't have a rational mind.
I would say, you were just raised to say that.
Yeah, exactly. That's an even quicker way. That cuts right to the to the chase. Exactly. Patrick Bateman again, $2. They say a person who happens to be raised by wolves would never develop a rational mind. How would you respond to that? Does our brain develop via social upbringing to perceive transcendental categories such as logic? I think that every human being, even if they're very savage, they still have a rational faculty. They still have reasoning. They still have these capabilities, even if they're not in the same way that would say, for example, a child or a retarded person has the faculties, but maybe not the exercise of them per se. So the exercise of what's there, it might take time to do that, to actualize it, but the capacity exists in them. BM Duper, Jay or Jimbob, what would you say is the difference between simulation and emulation in a philosophical sense? What is more compatible to a Christian worldview? I mean, to emulate just means to copy as well, so I don't know that there is some specific, maybe some philosopher uses them in some technical way, but I'm not aware of it. Do you have any comment, Jimbo?
Yeah, I would say the distinction I think there would be is that we emulate each other. We emulate when we do impersonations. We try to emulate Christ in a sense. And then a simulation would assume that we're like a replica of the thing we're emulating. And I think that would be the distinction, that an emulation we wouldn't say we are the identical of that thing because we're emulating it. We would, because we're emulating it, we're actually saying that we're not a simulation of that thing, that we're something different than that thing that we're trying to take on the behaviors of, or something like that. Like a simulation would be something else. It would be like some new apparatus that was made. So
Harry Serpanos, $10. Global elites are offering a BS Luciferian reality that has fake benefits. I agree. Ultimately, they just want to establish a new neo-feudal slave society with an AI god that they control. I agree. This also explains the current escalation of the war on Christ and on the church. Yep, totally agree with that. Any comment, Jimbo?
no, it's just true.
Joseph, $10. Rest in peace, Dolly. Instead of Wally, what's Dolly? Anybody know? All right. Travis, instead of Wally, the Pixar movie Wally, the robot.
I know AI. There's an AI Dolly that makes images. I don't know.
Maybe that's what. That's right. Dolly is that. I was getting it mixed up with Wally. Never mind. Travis, $10. The design of the human body is great and useful for robot copies. That's what Kurzweil says. But they also want to play God and make them desirable to humans. Yes, this new movie that I just reviewed, Creator. Did you see that, Jimbob? It's actually everything we're talking about.
Not yet. I did hear your thing. I didn't care about. I kind of like assumed the
it's
movie.
It's not really worth watching, except that it's all of the propaganda that we've talked about tonight, like in one movie. Absolutely. Mark, $5. Hypothetically, could humans dissect or crack the code of reality? Are there therefore Christian theoretical physicists or high science researchers? Yeah, there's that one Frank Tipler guy who wrote a book that a lot of people found to be convincing about the physics of immortality that actually led a lot of people to Christianity over the years. I think it's okay. There's that book that I read many years ago that I've recommended, Paul Davies' Mind of God, that's pretty good. But when it comes to quantum physics, I don't have all that stuff's so speculative. I don't really have any opinions on it, but it's certainly possible that people could crack the code. And my opinion is that Neoplatonism has a lot of truths for the created order, not for God. But I would. And go ahead.
I would say the limitation of that as well, it would be, there is a pitfall there that might occur, is where you reduce the truth to descriptions of things, an it, as opposed to a being, a who. Like the truth, like when we ask what is truth, it's actually who is truth. When we ask what is moral, we're actually asking who is moral. And so there might be a tendency in that view, whatever level, like Jay said, they do crack a code, it has to be reduced just to descriptive truths. It can't really, there's no cracking the code of, Christ's engagement with reality. And so, not that Jay was saying that, I'm just saying
you're totally
there's
right.
Immediately a limitation.
Yeah, there's always limits to that in terms of human finitude. That's a great point. So cracking the code, what's that stupid shit they say about CERN? The God particle. Dude, we found the God particle. He's like, God is over there in that machine, dude. As if, this kind of stuff is silly, right? As if you could like Max Tegmark. I remember I was watching, Elon was doing a space, and he popped up, and Elon was promoting the space with Max Tegmark, who says that all reality is fundamentally code and algorithms. I don't know if he actually affirms simulation hypothesis, but he does believe that reality is actually math. Like it literally is math. So he's kind of like a modern Pythagorean, right? The Pythagoreans said that reality is just purely mathematics. So that's another delusion of kind of like, it may be true that, like Jimbob said, that levels of reality are mathematical and organized and geometric, but it doesn't follow from that all reality is identically math, right? I mean, humans always want to have these all-encompassing systems that they built and discovered. They want a new grand narrative. And so when people posit something like sim theory, that's another new grand narrative. Max Tegmark saying all reality just is math is a new kind of grand narrative. Same thing with materialism. It's an older version of the grand narrative. All reality is just matter and motion, dude. But
yeah, they also say like information. That's the other take.
That's Tegmark too, yeah.
All of it's information, which is another way of saying it's math in a sense. But I always ask these people, can you point to a piece of matter that is identical to the information we attribute it to? And they could never do it, of course.
Exactly.
Right? Like the coconuts problem, right?
Yeah, it's another reductionist move. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's basically another type of Platonism. I mean, you could be a Platonist and believe that reality is actually truly just, I mean, that's basically Platonism, right? I mean, Plato, Pythagoras, the reality that's really the real stuff is math and the forms, right? And the forms are basically numbers of math. So, okay, but what does it mean then to say that, number one, how are there distinctions if all reality is numbers? Because is it one number? Like everything is just one? Or is reality also 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and all the other numbers? Right. So one of the many problem arises right there. How come this reality doesn't seem to be math? It seems to be a bunch of different things, right? This is go ahead.
Also, math is descriptive. This is part of the scientismo move, is to collapse descriptions and explanations. And I know explanations, you can say, semantically, an explanation, you're describing something. But these are two different things. Math describes and it doesn't explain. So if all of reality includes explanations, well, you can't get that with math. And like Aaron Christopher says in the chat, great point. Math can't explain how math came to be. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, but this is where Kurt Gödel, this is a consequence, at least. I couldn't fully understand what he was doing with all of this.
He just refutes Bertrand Russell's attempt at an all-encompassing grand narrative system, which Russell says everything can be explained as sets, math sets, and basic number sets and so forth, set theory. And Gödel says, well, every set will at some point refer to something outside of the set. And so it's basically showing that it's an incomplete system. There's always a level of incompleteness, hence incompleteness theorem. So you could never have an all-encompassing math that is and explains everything. Also, there's a lot of different ways you can critique this. I like that one, Jimbob. That's really good. You could also say something like, well, does it really make sense to say that the self is math? I mean, when I say I, and I talk about the subject, the agent that, does what I do and engages in the activities that I engage in and that has these experiences, the receiver of these experiences, the actor in these experiences. Does it make sense to say that I'm basically just 7? I mean, what does it mean to say that the I is number? I mean, that it really makes no sense, right? And so all the reductionist moves, right, really have no way to explain these kinds of questions. It also makes no sense in terms of good and evil. If all reality is just numbers, then the good is just a bunch of numbers, just like the bad is a bunch of numbers. So there's really no difference between good and evil, right and wrong, true and false. It's just different numbers. And why would we choose one set of numbers over another set of numbers? There's no ought, so you can't get an ought from an is would also plague the the Spurg code. It's like the ultimate Spurg world. We live in we live in an algorithm, right? Because the Spurg is thinking that all reality is like his Texas Instrument calculator or something like that.
It's interesting, Jake. There's a guy I know. Smith in the chat, he's into gematria, and this is another problem. Actually, what we're talking about is in a way, a direct criticism of where gematria leads you, which is just descriptions of reality. And one of the key things when I went after gematria hard a couple months, maybe
I watched that. It was a great critique. I mean, I loved your point about how arbitrary you're arbitrarily choosing certain patterns and numbers and discarding others. It was great.
Yeah, and also the assumption I don't think this is good for the brain either, is that if you look at numbers as occurrences as opposed to symbols, like, you're going to get into wacky territory, because you're going to end up like Jim Carrey in that movie.
Number 23, that's a great one.
And numbers aren't occurrences. Numbers are descriptions. How
come we're seeing, like, it's funny because gematria people, it's like, well, how come everything's not the laws of logic? Like, why is it numbers, right? Like, there's other types of abstract entities, right? It's never like, everything is the law of, identity, or everything is the, modus ponens. It's always the idea that everything is a sequence of numbers. And if you watch the movie Pi, it's funny because Darren Aronofsky kind of, it's been many years since I watched it, but he's actually kind of he's satirizing this to a degree, because the Kabbalistic Jewish guy goes nuts when he really gets consistent with this gematria worldview. He goes crazy because, and I really do think it's true, like, the problem with this approach is that it's ultimately superstitious. It places you at the behest of the machine or these forces. And it's like Jesus says about the Sabbath, right? The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Likewise, I could apply that to numbers. Numbers were made for man, not man to be dominated and ruled by numbers. And so it's just another type of slavishness and superstition.
Yeah, and it just takes you away from practice. What is the praxis of goodness? Like, how do you practice goodness, or, like, how do you get close to God? What is theosis if everything's just numbers, right? So, is it figuring out more codes? I mean, it ends up,
Yeah, so what my life is just to sit around and do math all day in this really abstract, absurd way, and not actually, I mean, it's just silly. It's retarded. I mean,
I try to pull people out of it, because
it's great. It was great. I thought the podcast was great. I remember years ago when I was reading a book on this, when I was kind of toying with the idea of, maybe gematria explains everything. This is probably 2007 or 8. I remember reading a book, and the guy was arguing about gematria, and then he made this point about, there was a point of the book where it was talking about how you can take everybody's name and then put it into numbers. And then he made this point where it was like, but there's different systems that you can use that will give you different numbers for each of the letters in a person's name. And I remember thinking, well, wait a minute, how do I know which one of these is the right one? And it's like,
there must be another cipher to tell you.
There's another cipher that it ciphers all the way down. Exactly.
But I want to try to be charitable here. Like, even from the biblical view, there might be power in numerology, or something about numerology that's important, whether it's somehow embedded in reality or in scripture or whatnot. But that's not the value itself, right? And so we wouldn't dismiss numerology in a sense that there's meaning in numbers, or something can be conveyed that's important, but rather that the constant attempt to decode isn't the thing we're called to do, right? Like, we don't dismiss that even there are people who still practice sort of like, some pseudo, what is it, like Jewish mysticism or something? Like, maybe they're still practicing.
Yeah, I mean, everybody should watch Darren Aronofsky's movie Pi. It was like his first, student film, and it's like this Jewish dude that's like a Hasidic or something, and he's really into math, and he gets more and more and more into mathematics, and he starts noticing patterns, and then he's into gematria, and then he thinks all reality is like somehow solvable or boils down to pi, and so hence the movie's called Pi. And he goes nuts, basically. I've spoiled the movie for you, but I mean, from my memory, it's like he just goes insane from this, because while it's true that mathematics is a way to study and to abstract from nature and to perform functions, it doesn't therefore translate into all reality just is mathematics, and you're just supposed to sit around and, you know, act like it's basically another type of horoscope where, you know, you're trying to decode everything with these silly Google, you know, decoders or whatever. It's like QAnon, you know, boomer decoder ring crap, but with gematria decoders. Anyway, another thing about that is that, yeah, the Bible actually does in places utilize this. For example, in John's Apocalypse, when he uses 666, I think that is a code for Nero. So it is actually one usage of gematria, but that does not mean that, and there is biblical numerology that's legitimate, like, you know, 7 refers to perfection and the Sabbath and all this kind of stuff. Sure, there's biblical numerology, but that doesn't mean that, like the silly Bible code hoax, if you remember this, when they were pushing this back in the 90s, that if you take the Torah and you put it in a computer and you have a word search, it pulls out, you know, that's like, it was literally Nostradamus level stuff, where it was like, look, tiny mustache man is in Genesis in the Bible code, and it's like, it will say anything eventually, right? It's another one of these things that'll say anything. So Bible code was another one of these scams that was fostered on the evangelical dupes in the 90s. Gematria is just another version of this nonsense. But it has a restricted use in the Apocalypse, because when John wrote that, he couldn't outright write the letter to the 7 churches and mention Nero, because it would have been shut down the letter. So he used code, cipher, and encoded Neuron Qusar, NRNQSR, as 666. And we know that it's that because there's a variant manuscript where it's 616, and that also still comes out to Nero Caesar. So that's pretty much a confirmation that John is using the code for that. Also, ancient languages, both Hebrew and Greek, before Arabic numerals, they used their letters as numbers too. So alpha is also 1, right? Aleph in Hebrew is 1. Alpha in Greek is 1. So beta is 2. Beth in Hebrew is 2. So you see how it's like, it's a practical thing that the letters were also numbers, because they didn't have Arabic numerals, and they were coding a word, Nero, right? It doesn't follow from that the entire Bible is a bunch of, like, you know, secret Gnostic codes to decode.
Yeah, right.
I'm sorry, I'm rambling a lot. I hope it's not
That's
getting
okay.
old to you.
It's okay. It's either going to be you rambling or me. So,
DC Woodworking, $3. Keep up the great work, Jimbob and Jay. Thank you so much, DC Woodworking. Be sure and subscribe, everybody, to Jimbob. Everybody watching this tomorrow, also go and subscribe to him. J-Bob, $3. In your meta-narratives book, you mentioned that the fundamental substrate of humans and matter is energetic information. Yeah, I was saying that created reality is ultimately fundamentally energy, but it's created energy. It's not God. God is uncreated life and energy, but I'm not saying that creation is God. Do you mean that a divine mind or the eternal communion within the Trinity is the basis of reality? I meant created reality is information. I don't think it's a problem to say that. I'm not saying that reality is only strictly code or information, but at the basic level, there is order and structure, and I'm just saying simply that God organized reality. It's not chaos, it's orderly at a fundamental level. That's what I was arguing there. But when I say that it's energy, I'm saying created energy. I'm not saying that fundamental reality is in the created order. It's still created. There's no such thing as created God. God is uncreated. Reality is created. The fundamental nature of reality, whether it's energy or whether it's not energy and it's particles or whatever, it's still created. That's what I was trying to say. Hopefully that's clear. Jimbob, anything you want to leave us with? We've been going for 2 hours. It's been a great show.
No. Again, my channel was under 2 strikes. I haven't been able to save, so please definitely go over and follow. I've lost some people, not for any other reason that they just didn't see me anymore. I'm not popping up in the algorithm, so please go over there and subscribe and check out the live streams Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I've developed a bunch of segments for my show now, and it made things pretty fun and funny over there. So any support helps me over there at the channel. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim Bob. Appreciate you coming on. And guys, remember, also like, share, leave below the comments of what you thought about this, ideas you have, suggestions of topics you want me and Jim Bob to cover down the road. A lot of fun, and absolutely come back anytime, man. And looking forward to a new chat with you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.